So with all of the changes that are happening in the state with the early learning master plan, pushing us to think about how we're serving our youngest learners across the state. And so Dr. Carla Bryant is bringing to this conversation more than 30 years of national experience in creating culturally competent policies, programs, and procedures for comprehensive early learning, P3, elementary family support, and after-school programs. She's also the founder of the Center for District Innovation and Leadership in Early Education, or DIAL-E. And their focus is supporting school districts to create and implement effective early education strategies within pre-K through 12 systems. I remember the first time I saw Dr. Bryant speak, she emphasized the importance of saying P12 and not K12, because we need to acknowledge that preschool is happening in our school districts. So DIAL-E works to support children and families from communities with less social, political, and monetary capital to build a strong educational foundation. She's previously served as the chief of the early education department for San Francisco Unified and was a strategic advisor for the city of Seattle, where she co-created Seattle's Early Education Collaborative. And so she comes to us with heaps of knowledge and experience working on developing and expanding early learning services for our youngest learners. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to you, Carla.
Thank you. Thank you, Heidi and the San Jose team. Welcome, everyone. I know you are very busy and could have easily opted to do something different today. So I honor your time, and I really hope that you find something in this discussion or in this series that is helpful to the work that you're doing. Thank you for Heidi for asking everyone to put their name, their agency in the chat, because I really want to know who has joined us. But for the next 45 minutes, I want to discuss what is your early education strategy. And to Heidi's point, specific to school districts and couched in this notion of universal pre-K. And there is no hidden meaning behind notion, but I'm going to actually ask us to think about this in a broader kind of way. And to do that, what I would like to do is highlight three areas and hope they will tie together in a way that you can see how it starts to build an early education strategy in multiple spaces, not only in a school district, but for us to look at how we frame it even within the state structure. To do that, I absolutely have to elevate the opportunities that we have now that possibly we didn't have pre-COVID. And no one can talk today about early education without talking a bit about COVID. The second thing I'd like to talk about is just how early education sits in the TK space, TK to 12 space in the state, and then transition from there to how it actually could sit in that space within a district. So first, we're going to talk about the opportunities. Second, we're going to talk about how do we elevate this early education strategy in a state setting, and then how do we also elevate it within a district setting. And let me just say ahead of time, all three of these parts could actually be a whole session in their own, but I'm offering them to you in a wonderment kind of way. When I think about the opportunity, this is how I'm looking at it, but I want you to look at it about how you can take this information and use it in your setting. So it is from a place of wonderment, but I also have to be honest, I also hope to provoke some conversation and create some discomfort, but in a way that you can take it away and generate some possible solutions. And to Heidi's point, I am definitely a person who comes with a lot of experience. I have been telling my children that I'm only 33 years old. it's a running joke. So I have over 30 years of experience, and I started when I was an infant. But I do, and my experience started out in Head Start, and in Head Start, I worked for 10 years in an organization that was the largest Head Start program in Oklahoma, and transitioned to the state of Georgia, where I was able to work with someone who's actually started up a Head Start. And then we eventually added state preschool. And as I was leaving, we were finishing out the grant and actually had been approved to start early Head Start. I left them because I started to do a lot of work for HighScope, and HighScope is an educational research foundation that specializes in researching curriculum and the best ways in which to serve our children in a very developmentally appropriate way. And from there, I transitioned to the city of Seattle in the mayor's office for education, where our work was about bringing together very disparate systems, Head Start, community-based organizations, school districts, to align our work in such a way that it was about serving the children and not competing with each other. And I will tell you, I learned a lot of lessons during that time. And from there, my transition was to the San Francisco Unified School Districts. And I have to tell you, I have a lot of stories to tell about that, but I won't. But I do use these experiences to really ground what we're going to talk about today. And I will share some stories that will elevate why I'm looking at these three different options or three different sessions to talk about. And then last, I have to say this. 30 years of experience was one thing, but being a parent literally altered what I thought what was good practice. There was nothing more humbling than to have children show you that what you think is the way to do things that may need to be rethought sometimes. And I would share stories about my children, except my son, who is now 8, found me on Facebook and let me know that he did not appreciate me sharing some of those stories. And so I made him a promise that I wouldn't do that anymore. So moving on. So the opportunities, what opportunities do we have currently? And I couch that into 4 different places. One, we had COVID-19, and COVID-19 provided us with a lot of information. Some of it good, some of it bad about our systems, but it did leave us also with some learnings, and I want to elevate those learnings. Next is our master plan. We can use our master plan in many ways to create the strategies that we think that we think are best for our children in our communities. Next, on top of learning about the master plan and all that it had to offer or suggest, California Department of Education's Department of Opportunity for All with Sarah Neville Morgan has decided to focus on 3 major parts around early education to kind of ground us in the work that we're doing. And I just want to shout out to that because I think it gives us an opportunity to really look at our data and how we can move our work in a way that we all can unify around a particular topic. And then last, I will tell you, there are so many bills that have elevated early education that anyone who's not aware of them is losing an opportunity. And along with those bills, there are a few budget asks that people should be aware of. And again, I'm just going to ground our strategies that we are going to use going forward with DIAL from these 4 opportunities. COVID. Wow. In February, Ed Trust West conducted a study with parents. They just asked them basic questions about how they were doing during this time. And their findings were very interesting. And I think we should not lose what occurred for families during COVID. For many parents in California, they are still having ongoing concerns, even with them going back to school. And you can see that as different parents in different communities have elected to either go back to school or not go back to school if those options were available to them. During this time, parents talked about a significant strain on their financial strains for them financially, job-related insecurities leading to, and imagine we have families who missed meals so their children could eat. We just can't lose that. Many parents sought and struggled with healthcare. And during this time, and think about this, we have, I think, a very decent healthcare system, but during this time, the shutdown meant that in some cases they shut down. And that did not mean that healthcare needs were not still out there, that families still needed things taken care of, but it became a little bit more complicated. Challenges around accessibility and affordability of childcare, if they could find it, if it was available to them. And parents made it real clear during this survey that they look to our systems to address these gaps. Now, I have to say, these were not gaps that we were not aware of, but they became exacerbated during this process or during COVID. So what are the lessons learned that we can actually turn into opportunity? We saw large systems shift from in-person to distance learning quickly. And we're talking about systems that would take years to make minor changes, making big changes. Now, we also learned that there were certain systems that had problems making those shifts, but they quickly learned from the field. The amount of documents that were produced to inform people about how to do things was amazing. Those were positives. It tells us that we can make changes when we need to, but it also says that we don't need to wait for a crisis to make those changes. So the opportunity we have that COVID has delivered us is that, first of all, the parents now know we can make these changes. The second thing, parents are going to be engaged on a whole nother level that they were not before, because they have wonderings now about the very systems that were put in place to help them and some of the failures they had. So they are going to return with a lot of opinions. And I say we should engage and embrace this. This is not a bad thing. This is just an opportunity. The second opportunity, of course, is the master plan. During COVID, the master plan, and I say COVID is now like this thing, but during this time, the master plan was released. And the master plan also provided us some insights about what we can do. It absolutely said in there that we will expand access to childcare and preschool. And let me just one more time go back to COVID, another learning. Did we not learn that a system that is held up by the lowest paid people is so critical to our entire structures? So to have in our master plan an opportunity to expand childcare and preschool, and this is an interesting conversation when you put it up against what has occurred because of COVID. There are a lot of articles and research out there that says that we will not get back the same number of people who left the field during COVID. So if we're talking about expanding, are we talking about expanding from the point in which it was pre-COVID, or are we talking about expanding to being bigger than it was based on where we are today, which is lower than what it was when we got started? So again, this is an opportunity to really think about this. How does this expansion in childcare and preschool look for both 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds? Increase access to paid family leave, something that is also a discussion not only in the state, but also for our federal government. Promote better quality childcare and preschool and more stable workforce. And enhance workforce training and development and create more equitable career paths for educators and caregivers. I'm going to kind of drill down a little bit deeper on that when I kind of highlight some some bills that are coming forth through California's legislative process. So I'm going to hold on that one to really expand on it and go to our third opportunity. And our third opportunity has to do with the Department of Opportunity for All and how they would like to take this as a time to really drill down on 3 things. And this is their vision for, and you'll see I have prenatal to preschool. And the reason why, when people say P to 3, some districts actually have infant toddler programs. In San Francisco, we did. So we worked prenatal to preschool. But I will offer to you, even districts who only will offer or only work preschool or TK to 3rd grade should also be in full partnership with the providers who are working in the prenatal infant and toddler space. And in doing that, the Department Opportunity for All is looking to see how they can drill down on these 3 issues: discipline, inclusion, and DLL. Again, a major opportunity. And just so you'll know, this work will be grounded in some work that has been done nationally by Christy Cowards at the National P3 Center in Denver. And I would offer to everyone to just go and look up at the work they've done. And this work, again, is aligned with the work that Dial EE is doing, which is about collaborating and working with people who are in our community. And again, Sarah provides us with an opportunity to focus our work on these 3 topics. The 4th opportunity, and this is a biggie. Please let me apologize ahead of time. I don't have time to actually go through each one of these bills, but I thought I should just elevate just 7. And this is only 7, there are more, but these are the 7 that I think provided an opportunity for us to look at how we're currently doing stuff, doing different things. So the ones in yellow are basically, they're like program kind of things. They are offering the idea of how do childcare, and I'm going to say, how do we in early education look at how we are providing DLL in our classrooms. And this bill opens up that conversation for that to happen. And again, I would suggest to everyone to please take time to go dig deeper into these bills. The 2 next to them, one about expulsion and suspension. And again, see the alignment between what Sarah's focus is and how this bill is elevating expulsion and suspension. And this becomes extremely important again when we think about what has occurred during COVID, when we start thinking about how anxiety may be a little bit higher than normal because of what has happened in the last year. AB 568, and again, we're talking about creating a data system in which we can actually start to make some deeper decisions about what kinds of services do we provide for children. The two bills that are in the light blue, they're in light blue to say to our districts, these have fiscal implications and you need to pay attention to them. And they're actually, depending on where you sit with it, the idea that our families don't have to pay family fees is a biggie. I think that is something we all can embrace. But that also means for some districts who have their budgets structured around family fees, they need to be aware of what this bill may mean to them. And then of course, the reimbursement rates. And I could have I am very clear. We learned that we absolutely must support our early care and education system, and the reimbursement rates must be redone. And I'm going to actually put out there that we can't use the old way of creating a formula. All we're doing is using a formula that just doesn't work and trying to make it we're trying to add more to it where what we need to do, and this is Carla, is just put it aside, abandon it, and actually pay agencies exactly what they need to run these services. Full stop. But this is the beginning of that conversation. These two, AB 50 and AB 22, wow. They have created, I would say, a buzz. Before I talk about these two bills, let me just simply say that as a system, as an organization that supports districts, we took the stance that we would not publicly be against or for a bill. But what we would work with is what would happen if these bills actually passed? How do we support the districts and making sure that they do the best they can do in implementing them? Or how do we use them as a thought place if they don't go all the way through? But they open up, I think, some critical conversations. So SB 50 provides an opportunity possibly for districts and CBOs to use their funds in a more fluid way without all of the restrictions. AB 22, which is the expansion of TK, which is a wink wink to pre-K. One of my questions to everyone is this really just universal pre-K, which really is, but it's called TK. But it's an opportunity to have some deep conversations about what are the impacts to the various districts, because the impacts are different based on the size of the district and the impacts to our community. We have to be in collaboration with our community, not at odds with them, because the children they serve will come to our districts. So we have to figure out what this looks like on both sides of the fence. I have a question here that asks me, so how soon will we see universal pre-K? I can't answer that. Maybe sooner than we think if the AB 22 passes, which is really TK, as soon as 2 years. That will roll out for the next 6 or 7 years. If it doesn't, it'll come back again, and it still will be part of the conversation. So I cannot actually predict when that will happen. And then part of our fourth opportunity is, along with legislature, there are bill considerations that come at budget considerations that happen at the same time. And all I want to do is elevate two particular budget considerations or ideas that are being floated out in our legislature around putting more money behind mental health. And this is just one that is being offered up by Myra. I cannot think of Myra's organization right now, but very brilliant lady who runs an organization that is looking at how can we provide mental health to our early ed space. And so they're asking for an investment to expand. Are you seeing this continued themes in here? To expand access to early childhood mental health consultations. Strengthen access to whole child and family-centered mental health care services in the pediatric settings. Mental health training and professional development for early childhood workforce. Expansion of Mental Health Student Service Act to include younger children. County Community Provider Learning Collaborative for Early Education Mental Health. Creation of a pilot program to expand home visiting services. Expansion of the trauma-informed care component of the Emergency Care Child Care Bridge program for foster youth. And then a public awareness campaign on early childhood mental health. This is just, again, another opportunity within this space. And then here's just one more example of how these discussions are going on right now today in California. And that is the Whole Equity Fund. And this is the Whole Child Equity Fund. One of the things we do with Dial is that we collaborate and partner with people or organizations that are aligned with where we would like to go in our belief systems. And one of them is Whole Child. And this is another reason why we have to talk about an early education strategy versus just preschool. This is about a whole child who's grounded in their families and they're part of a community. And when we separate it out into this one targeted thing, a child, and forget about all the other parts, we lose opportunities to actually make bigger change. Well, this group has actually put forth what they think are some ideas around how we could fund this whole child initiative. And one is to create an equity index. And I'll go back to what we learned during COVID. The families who appeared to need the most or had the most risk factors are the families that were harmed or had greater impacts behind what happened with COVID. We want to make sure that during this time when all of these funds that we didn't think we would have available are targeted in a very universal way. We're not saying leave out others, but we're saying pay attention to the ones who absolutely were affected by what happened during COVID. And quite honestly, we're being affected before this. The other thing they're offering up is that maybe we can have some whole family wellness hubs, which are very similar to community schools that we see in the K12 space, but we need to also provide this in the early education space. So these are just opportunities in which we can actually leverage to do our work within our own communities. And I'm going to stop here and I'm going to say there are opportunities, but I'm going to challenge all of us to think of this again in a bigger way, not just pre-K, but an early education strategy, a strategy that moves infant tolerant. Doesn't mean that you have to be doing all of the work. It means we collaborate and partner. But these four, and these are just four, there are others, but these are just four things we can use to leverage that conversation. So I'm going to stop. And I know I can see there are different things that have been put in the chat box, and I'm going to ask Heidi or Emily or someone to quickly look in the chat box. And if there's one or two things that I can respond to before I move to the second part of this this conversation. First part being the opportunities, and now what do we do with those opportunities?
Carla, this is Maria chiming in. There was a question that came up from a participant asking about Head Start, and how do you address the question that comes up with, what we've learned from research with Head Start is that it didn't make much of a difference. She's mentioning she is a Head Start fan. How do you respond to that?
I will say that we have to embrace what it says. I will say to you that, does it mean that we throw out Head Start? No, it says we need to sit back and ask ourselves, what was the purpose of Head Start? What was it supposed to be doing? How do we know that if they were doing what we thought they should be doing, has it been so clearly stated? And I'll give you an example. I remember when I was in Head Start, and I was in Head Start, I worked for Head Start for 10 years. And I'll never forget the day I decided that I needed to step back. I was at a family function, and a mother stood up and she talked about she was 3rd generation Head Start. And I remember thinking, oh, that's not good. I'm happy she's coming to Head Start, but wasn't the hope that they would not need this structure? That to be in Head Start, it's around social economic status or situations, and we want them to elevate from that. And it started a dialogue about, so what did we think success was? And that has changed over time. So I would say, I take it seriously. I think Head Start should ask itself, if it's not, what do they need to do differently? And how can they do it in such a way that they're not going at it alone? But I can see how that can be a conclusion about Head Start. And I'm trying to be, and Carla normally is not, as though I'm talking about myself and another person, but I'm a person who's very forthcoming with a lot of things. But when it comes to Head Start, I think it has a role, but they have to get clear, and they have to think about what their success looked like, and they have to come up with very clear strategies around that. And then they need to make it very obvious to everyone. And as we talk about making our own structures obvious to within the state, maybe Head Start could think about how they can do some of this work as well. But not a failure totally is my answer, but they have work to do, and I hope they embrace that work.
Thanks for that. There's another question that came up about, can you share an example of a district that does have a strong early education strategy?
I can. And I will tell you that all of the districts that I share are not all the way there, but they are really, really working hard to make it happen. And I want to elevate Fresno. Fresno, Deanna has works very closely with her community. She also is not only is she overseeing her pre-K but TK, but she also weighs in on what happens with the kindergartners. And the reason why that is so powerful is that one of our key components of having an early education strategy is that it has to be over multiple grades. It can't be just pre-K. It has to be pre-K down to infant toddler or pre-K to third grade. But families need more than just one year. We need to be aligned multiple years. But Fresno is one of them. One that they constantly offer up as a possibility is Boston. And Boston actually does amazing work within the district. And they have the data to prove that their aligned work that goes all the way up to, I think now, first grade or possibly second grade has made a difference. But I would say they're not fully there yet for this reason. Their work with the community is still in its infant stages. So those are two examples. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the second session, which is, so what do we focus on in DAL? And I will tell you, we focus on two things. One, we are absolutely trying to make early education visible in the TK-12 space, in the pre-K-12 space. And when I say visible, I mean, can I go to a website of any school district and see the importance of pre-K, TK, and K in all of their outward-facing information? Is it visible in all of the structures or places where the superintendents hang out? Is it one of their major strategies in the same way that they have a high school strategy? Do you notice you have a high school strategy? You don't have a 12th grade strategy. You have a middle school strategy. You have an elementary strategy. You don't have a specific grade strategy, even though we focus on third grade because of the assessment process and the beginnings of it. So the first part is to elevate early education in the state and within the districts. Our second strategy, and I'll talk about that when I get to the third session, is about creating proof points. And I'm going to say to my early education people who are on this call, and it goes back to the question asked me, do you have examples? We have to provide people with places they can go and see something. And they have to be in a variety of settings. Otherwise, what we are, we're just simply talking about what it could be. We need to make it happen. So I call those proof points. So now what? How do we help districts synthesize and leverage all of these opportunities? How do we make it visible? How do we make visible in TK settings And how do we shine a light on all of the efforts that are already in progress? So the first question is, why do we care about what happens within a district setting? And let me just provide this as evidence. If you look at this chart or this graph, it provides for us the breakup in 2019 of the CSPP contractors. 50% of the funds out of CSPP go to districts. 49.3%, is that right? 49.5%. And if you count the county offices, they get 8%. So close to 60% of the CSPP funds sit in the I'm correcting myself, in the PK-12 space. That's where it sits. But this is the other part of it. These settings are extremely diverse, but they do have some things in common. This is a chart, and unfortunately, I'm not able, when you move over the dots, it actually tells you the name of the district. That shows you how much money the different districts have in their contracts. Missing from here is LA Unified, because they have over 130 million. And when you put that on the chart, it just literally just squashes the whole chart down. But notice something, the top 14, 15 districts have under $5 million. The average for all of these districts is only $2 million, $2.5 million. So we're talking about under 300 districts, 297, 295, and that number moves every year. Most of them are small contracts. So that tells us that a lot of the children sit in our community. And I emphasize this because this is about the partnership. But the districts are the place where the transitions are being held. And I'm talking more than just a transition that is talked about where we pass a documentation back and forth to each other. I'm talking about a partnership and a collaboration. And this also helps us understand why we have to ponder AB 22. What does it look like for these approximately 300 districts? What does the rollout look like? And what does it look like for the districts who don't have CSPP and who are going to go straight into expanded TK? AB 22 is a point where communities need to come together and start to dialogue about what does it mean. And one of the main reasons why we need to have this dialogue is I have to uplift some barriers. Elliot Regenstein, who's with the Policy and Law Agency in Chicago, but does a lot of great work in writings about this intersection between the early education world and the K-12 world, or the pre-K world. He states the following: for years, the K-12 world, and this is a direct quote from out of one of his articles, has fundamentally underappreciated how the early years shape long-term educational outcomes. In both the K-12 and early learning worlds, there has been a corollary underestimation of the many ways policy and culture enforce a separation between the two. So I'm arguing for the two to come together, and he's letting us know, but there are some issues that prevent that. He also wrote a second paper, which was about California, which I think everyone should take time to read. And basically he reiterated the problems between the alignment between the early ed space and the TK or the pre-K 12 space. But he says there's opportunities. And the opportunities he elevated were actually from the four that I talked about. Well, he didn't talk about COVID, but he did talk about the master plan, the work that the Sarah Neville Morgan wants to do in her setting. And we have these bills that are really giving us an opportunity to have these discussions. So what does it look like, this early education plan? And I'm going to tell you, the first plan is about the state space. And I will tell you, in all the work I did, one of the lessons I learned, you cannot do this work from the bottom only, and you cannot do this work from the top only. It has to be from the homemaker to the policymaker. It has to be aligned, and you started at the same time. This is just an illustration of how DIAL is helping our districts synthesize all of the information that's going on. When you sit in a district setting, you're living between two worlds. And what I tell our leaders is that you have to be proficient in all of this. You have to understand the bills so you can go back and talk to your district. And so you can talk to the actual policymakers. So this is just a way of illustrating that. So how are we elevating this work in these two different spaces? The visible governance. This is just us saying we are doing it in 4 ways. We're doing it through research, a variety of communication processes, because people hear things in different ways. And so we want to share what's going on in this space in as many ways as we can, through our collaborations, because there's a lot of people doing amazing work in early childhood, but we need to elevate it, and we need to collaborate with them when we're in a district. And I want to remind everyone, I'm speaking from a district perspective. I'm saying to districts, you have to collaborate with all these different spaces. I don't tell you which ones, I don't offer which ones, because they're very community specific, but you also need to weigh in on policy. And we actually provide a space for that. So that's one. In the leadership part, this is where we talk about with the fellows, how they work within their district to create these early education strategies. So let me quickly roll through how we're doing this work in the state and making it more visible and elevating early education as a strategy. And I'm going to tell you, this is a full-on marketing, oops, and sorry, I don't know whose thing is ringing. But this is a full-on strategy around marketing early education in the state. And I will tell you, no matter what happens with AB 22, no matter what happens, and I will tell you, I was part of the state pre-K startup in Georgia, universal pre-K. The lesson I learned is that you cannot start talking about these bills early enough. That if you want people actually to understand what you're trying to do and to implement it, you have to start talking at the very beginning. So how are we doing this? One, through our research. We actually asked the fellows, what questions do you have of the field? What do you want to know? We know there's a lot of things out there, but we start from them. And these are just examples of some of the things that we have produced with the fellows. One was some documents about how to open up to do distance learning. But the one that we are really excited about is when we basically just simply did a survey of the different districts in California. We were able to look at the districts with preschool who have these CSPP contracts. Now, there may be districts out there who don't have CSPP, but are doing preschool. We don't know who they are, but our job is that we're going to figure it out. So what we wanted to know was, how are those individuals, or how is early education positioned in those districts? We were asking questions like, are they positioned? We were asking questions around the website. Could we see them? Did we see them on the org? Did we see the early education person on the org chart? We wanted to know, what were they over? Did they oversee just the pre-K? Were they over their own budgets? So we were just asking, how visible are you in your district? And then from there, we took that information and we produced a document and we gave it out to the field. And we think this is important because when we start collaborating and communicating, we want to make sure we're communicating what is the state of affairs for the districts when it comes to ECE. Communication. How do we do our communication? Again, we're trying to be in as many spaces as we can. We do presentations, but we're doing presentations in places that you may not see as much early education. So that means in the professional associations associated with the school district, the superintendents, with AXA, which is the Association for California Superintendents and Administrators, CASA, the California African American Association, CALSA, the California Latino Association. So we're trying to be in the spaces where you don't normally see early education, elevating the work that happens in early education and elevating the work that could be done in partnership. The other ways we do communication, of course, we have our publications, but we have something we call our podcasts. And again, this goes to the question of where are we seeing those individuals implementing these early education strategies? Well, we are creating something we call Unicorner, and this is the podcast of superintendents who are actually elevating the work of early education in their district. And we're not talking about elevating that they talk about it, but elevating because they are putting money behind it from the general funding. They are in the LCFF. They're part of the strategic planning. So we are identifying those individuals and we're elevating their work. The next part is we're doing Follow the Buzz. And Follow the Buzz is our fellows, where they identify people doing this collaborative work in their communities. An example of how we're communicating our work is something as simple as this. We created, or a visibility tool was created to help districts look at their websites, look at their org chart. We sent out the tool to all of the districts that we actually looked at their websites. We identified websites that were really good under certain parts. And we basically said, use the tool, see if it helps, and then see if it helps you be more visible in your district. And I will tell you, we are going to go back in a year. We're going to look at it again and see if it made a difference. Again, a way of just elevating the work and making it more prominent. Our collaborations, we collaborate with these various agencies to communicate. So think about this, we research, we identify who's doing the work, we collaborate with the people who are doing the work, and we elevate these partnerships. And then we use these partnerships to talk about the policies. And that's the fourth part of our work. We are deeply engaged in the policies. We reach out to the sponsors of these various bills. We sit with them. We ask them, what are you thinking? We then get back to them and let them know how we think these bills will impact us and where there might be some amendments that they may want to think through when it's appropriate. But we are deeply engaged in this discussion because it directly impacts how the strategies that are rolled out by these districts can occur. Again, I'm going to stop here. And I'm going to ask if there in the chat box, if there are some questions that I can talk about before I do this last part quickly. Maria?
Yeah, folks are also, we don't have any new questions, but folks are welcome to unmute and ask verbally if they prefer to do that.
Oh.
So.
Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead, and this part is a lot quicker. So again, our California-wide strategy, 4 parts. We are asking our field questions about what do they want to know about the field? What do they want us to elevate? We partner with various universities, asking them for students, but we also have a really amazing researcher, Dr. Gigi Weisenfeld, who works for NEAR, that helps us do the research in a very research way to make sure that our work is credible. But once we do the research, we communicate. We let people know what we learned. We talk about the districts, the small districts whose voices are not being heard. We talk about what these different policies mean to them. So we are constantly communicating this information, and we're seeking out people who are doing this work so we can elevate them. And we're collaborating with the people who are doing this deep work to align our work, and then we're informing policy. But all of this is not or doesn't work unless we have districts who are implementing this deeply within their own setting. And that's our last strategy. It is, we are saying to the districts, you need an early education strategy. And here are the components to that strategy. We're trying to let everyone know the value of the strategy within the bigger field, but they're going to need proof points. And those proof points are going to come directly from the district. And we do this by doing two things. We meet with the fellows, we meet with these districts to actually synthesize all of this information that's coming at them. You have these opportunities are only opportunities if you know about them, if you understand them, and you can see how you can leverage them. So we help with the synthesis of that. We help with, so what does this mean to your implementation? And all of these conversations occur in our meetings. And in our meetings is where we identify group problems that we all can solve together. We can produce a document and give it out to the field. But it is the mini grants that we give to our districts to help them figure out how do they then take this information and then work a plan within their district. Well, we actually work with them to come up. So what is a plan? Is it okay to just keep doing what we're doing? And we say to them, this is what we want you to consider. There are 6 things that must be in place of an early education plan and strategy. 6 things. 1, what you're working on must be across multiple grade perspectives. It could be preschool to 3rd grade, prenatal to transition kindergarten. It can be prenatal to 5th grade, but it has to be multi-year. And I want you to think about what that, and I always tell everyone, and this is, and let me please apologize for anyone who may be offended about what I'm going to say. When we focus on 1 year, I want you to think about what that means to a family. Do we just try to save a child? We believe in our heart that we can do this one thing and everything is okay. They get 1 good year. They get preschool and we have saved them. We have given them all that they need. No, we have to think across multiple years. That is only respectful. It doesn't mean that we cannot focus on preschool and make it as strong as it can because it's the in-between, but it's not enough. We have to expand how we look at our strategy. So that's the first one. The second one, that it not only is it multi-grade, it must be multi-year. It cannot be 1 year of work. It has to be years of looking at the data, coming back, rethinking about it, and making changes. It has to have, number 3, a multidisciplinary partnership. And I will tell, and I will share this quick story. When I went into San Francisco Unified, it was, I could have easily just worked within my department and did good work. But to do the work that was respectful to the children and the families, I needed to work across multiple systems within the district. I needed the help of my research and development department. I needed the help of my HR so I could figure out how to restructure contracts so I could make sure that teachers had time for professional development. I needed the help of the curriculum and instruction department so I could absolutely expand on the offerings that we had. I needed the help of Stanford, who helped us figure out how to measure kindergarten readiness in a way that was developmentally appropriate and respectful. I needed the help of my Head Start partners because they had information they could share with me to make sure that we were doing things that were respectful of the community. It has to be multidisciplinary across multiple agencies and multiple departments. The next, you must have clearly stated goals. And let me say this may be some of the things that Head Start has to think about. They do a lot of amazing work, good work. But what has it got us? Clearly stated goals, and they do. And what's so interesting is that they started to build all that in there. But the next step is to go deeper and say, are our goals aligned with what we think are the outcomes? We must have a transdisciplinary solution to complex issue. And let me just say this. This goes back to the belief that pre-K is not the only thing, is not enough in itself to deal with these really complex issues. It is prenatal. It is infant, toddler, preschool. We have to be across. It has, when we say we are solving something, if we're solving, and I will tell you, I have a hard time using the word discipline because I think discipline is rooted in what occurs around those children. And so we should be looking at things like the instruction. And so it's a complex issue and we have to not make these things simpler so they're easier to do. And then the last, there has to be an agreement. Everyone must understand their part in this and everyone must understand where their accountability lies. And they have to be willing to come back to the table and renegotiate this. Where these places are happening, where they're starting to happen in this deep level where they're looking at themselves in this way, are those districts that we're working with our fellows. But it's also happening in other places. And I will ask anyone that if you have a place, please share that with us because we would like to know so we can elevate their work and learn from them. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thanks so much here. Thank you. We're gonna, I just want to say thank you. There's been some great shout outs in the chat in terms of your focus on the like looking at multiple years and considering the whole child. There's one more question, kind of two related questions in terms of collaboration. Maybe you can just speak to this point. How do you kind of facilitate collaboration across these different players? Does one party tend to reach out to the other, or is it, how does it come to be? And then how can you facilitate those connections?
Wow. I will say that a lot of collaborations start out of need. They really do. What are you working on? That you need the assistance of someone else or another agency, another department. I will say all of my collaborations started that way. The collaboration we created in Seattle that was across those multiple, and I will say they were disparate. They were systems that we're not talking to each other. And as a person who loves the work that I'm doing with districts, the worst collaborator was the district. It was just fascinating to me, but we needed them. I would say you start with what you're trying to solve, and those solutions will come to you.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that insight and for all of what you just shared with us. I'm sure we'll take a lot of this back into our different roles and thinking about how we can help move this idea of early education strategies and what role the districts play forward. We are at 4 o'clock. So at this point, I hope that we can invite students. Anyone who here is the current student at San Jose State is welcome to kind of stay on. And Dr. Bryant would love to meet with a smaller group and answer any questions that you might have for her. So while we make that transition, again, just thank you on behalf of the Early Childhood Institute for your presentation and sharing your wisdom with our community here at San Jose State.
Thank you.